Gaudium, that they are somehow evangelizing for the church. Could you address that?
Yes, I certainly can address this question. And I would cast it in terms of the distinction between evangelization and proselytization. This is a distinction that actually at the Vatican II conference over the weekend, Bishop Murray was here, and he casted this distinction as well, and Dr. Bo did as well in the panel presentation. And I know the difference for me is when I'm teaching and thinking about evangelization, and very explicitly in theology, of course, really talking about these things very explicitly, constantly. It's more in the way of an invitation for the students to consider. It's more introducing it into conversation. And I think oftentimes, the gospel of Jesus I would describe as very countercultural, to our, Western U.S. culture, generally speaking. In terms of this idea of becoming a gift yourself. When you turn on, Q92 or Z88, these popular radio stations, this is not the message here. And so I think in order to invite it into conversation, there has to be even a kind of emphasis on the peculiar contours of the gospel of Christ, as countercultural as they were in his day and as they are today. And to let that, be kind of, let it be a little abrasive, let it have this, friendly, civil conflict of ideas, which is the very dialectical tension necessary for the fruitfulness of education to take place. So the difference between evangelization is just allowing the gospel to be proclaimed, allow it to proclaim its message and to let it be considered, versus proselytizing, which would be a kind of reductionism in which the goal would be just to kind of make converts and to kind of coerce and to try to kind of pull the wool over people's eyes and not enter into real honest, intellectual dialogue in an interdisciplinary kind of fashion. So I think there's a real key difference. And I think it's intellectually irresponsible to not allow the gospel to have a place in the conversation. As uncomfortable as the gospel makes people, as uncomfortable as the J word makes people, I think, to be intellectually responsible, especially in the culture of the Catholic intellectual heritage and tradition, is to have a total sense of openness to the various voices and perspectives, and to wrestle.
I just wondered if I could just add just a couple of theological thoughts to that. Of course, most of you know the word evangelization comes from the Greek evangeloi, which of course means gospel, which means good news. The good news is that Jesus has come to save us all. And part of that good news is that Jesus uses us in service to help save one another and bring one another to faith into salvation. And so one of the difficulties is that sometimes the gospel comforts the afflicted, but sometimes it has to afflict the comfort, which is part of the message of the church, and that's not always easy. But of course, we have to stand for something, especially to be a voice for the voiceless and a defense for the defenseless. So one of the bottom lines here that is kind of a presupposition is that every person, whether we've articulated it or not, has an anthropology. Every one of us and everybody that we meet, and most of the time it's unarticulated, you have an idea of what the human person is and why we're here and what we're doing, or even questions about it. Whereas this whole enterprise of faith is built on a theological anthropology. And the theological anthropology is at the bottom of it all, and that is that we're created in the image and likeness of God. And we're created as God's children and loves us very, very much. And in fact, wants us to be with Him. There's an implicit responsibility for one another, and part of that responsibility, of course, is to teach. So I think that one of the things that we need to keep in mind is there's a whole anthropology that's a theological anthropology that casts us a particular reason why we're here. And if to cast it just some other philosophical terms, some existentialists, just to pull out, would say that we have our existence and then we try to figure out our essence by living up. People like Camus and folks like that. Whereas in theological anthropology, we already know our essence. We know who we are, and that's how we live it out, existentially. So just want to kind of throw that theological apology.
Thank you, Father. Yes, Brother Guy.
First of all, my first comment would be, I think you did a good job, very good, integrating all of these things together. It's very insightful. What I would say is, in terms of evangelization, is that we invite, we propose rather than impose. That's the key distinction when we talk about evangelization. And evangelization has to see in terms of other documents of Vatican II, for example, on religious dialogue, humanism, both of these topics also have to be looked at in terms of this. And even the first document of the church itself has to be looked at in terms of seeing this in a very nuanced perspective of seeking the truth, bringing the truth to people, but also very respectful of the dignity of the person and their conscience. And so we're going to hear a lot more about evangelization because of the sin coming up in that response.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a great point. So we can't forget about the other 16 documents of the Council, such as the decree on religious liberty, the decree on non-Christian religion, the decree on humanism, and how this emphasis of dialogue respects the dignity of the conscience of every human person and is not coercive or manipulative or in a sense propagandizing, but is in a sense very open and intellectually honest. And it seeks to listen as well as speak.
I'm Dan Cunningham. I'm on the adjunct business school, and I teach business ethics. And to kind of write a comment Brother Guy made, what I find useful is certainly talking about Gaudium Spes and trying to identify the social justice, economic, and business nuances and proclamations of that. But I also get a lot of updated material, if you will, from the Pontifical Council on Peace and Justice, and some of the documents they'll come out with within the last couple of years. Most recently, last month, was a very good paper that has a lot of promise on the positive aspects of being a business person and ethical responsibility for business. So I make sure I certainly don't ignore about it as but I think there's ways to bring it to life with some of the post-Vatican II documents that are very much up to date and certainly don't conflict with that.
That's a great one. Yes, thank you for adding that. That's really an extension of the whole premise of engaging Gaudium as a conversation partner, not only Gaudium, but the more recent applications of statutory teaching, as you say, the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, for instance, and all these documents are available readily online, and you can even subscribe to email where you get updates from different sources, and it's very helpful for teaching. Thank you. Yeah.
I think I heard you, and I didn't jot it down, that you said something where you used an expression something like intellectually irresponsible. And I wonder if you could clarify what you mean. How did you use that? What is it that you were referring to as intellectually irresponsible?
I think
If you recall.
yes, when I say intellectually irresponsible, or another way to say it, intellectually dishonest,
Yeah.
is to intentionally suppress certain questions that might be raised in the classroom. In terms of, not allowing students to raise whatever question comes to mind from whatever discipline,
So you were not referring to a use of the document?
No, I was referring to a misuse or a non-use of the document. I would argue would be intellectually dishonest or irresponsible. Why not engage such a document of such magnitude? Of these 2,500 plus bishops, the truly ecumenical council for the first time in history around the world coming together, consulting with men and women in non-Christian following this great conversation to miss the magnitude and the significance of this on the map of history, especially the history of the church and the Catholic intellectual tradition, would be even naive.
Right. So my question now is, I'm not Catholic. I believe that there's some divine, but I don't hold to anything having to do with what might be contained in the creed of the church about the divinity of Jesus, the Holy Spirit, the kingdom of God, the future of heaven, etc., etc. Is it possible for me to use this document interpreted secularly in a class? Can I do that?
I think, again, if we raise the language of kind of a secular application, I mean, that kind of interpretation, what's meant by secular, I would say it raises a flag in terms of there could be a tendency to reductionism, reduce the richness of the document, the unique voice which it is and voices encompassed in the document, to a particular worldview that's determined a priori in the classroom. That's a kind of reductionism. But instead of leaving possibility open in whatever field of study, and this is a contender for truth, and this voice, this gospel of Christ, speaks a message, just even sociologically speaking, so powerful that so many people resonate with it and call themselves Christian, followers of Christ. And what is the testimony? What is the legacy of this church, of these people? Ambiguous as it is, ambiguous as history is, let all come to the table in conversation. Yes.
A similar question. So how would you distinguish that approach, what you're saying, from, say, something like what you might take at Kent State, I think, introduction to, say, world religion, where you're teaching a variety of religious traditions, introduce students to various discourses in those religions, if the class is going on, so, can they be? But how would that be distinguished from what, say, teaching in accordance with the mission of Walsh? I wonder if you dive into that a little bit.
Yeah, I think a fruitful dialogue is to be had with the public institutions and, say, private institutions of different stripes, like Walsh. I think when there's this kind of ditch, this chasm that's placed in between, the public education proposal and then the private education proposal, since they're two different worlds, two different things, I think that's, again, a kind of stereotyped introductionism. I think the difference at Walsh, it goes back to Brother Marcel's comment. We do not have a mission. The mission has us. And if we're to be truly servant leaders at Walsh University, in a sense, we're not about proclaiming our own message as much as we are there to serve a message which has us, in a sense. So it's leaving open the possibility of the transformative power of the message and the particularity and explicitness of the message of Jesus of Nazareth and the Catholic Church, and so the emphasis is there. The emphasis is, so to speak, on the offbeat of the culture. Whereas at other institutions, there's not that emphasis on the gospel of Christ in particular, and the Catholic intellectual tradition. It's not engaged as intentionally as we would engage it here in service to the mission which has been entrusted to us.
This is all really interesting and difficult. And I appreciate that we're having this conversation. I think these are difficult questions to try to answer. And I'm just wondering what this means for our mission that also holds that we want to be a diverse culture. Like, what does that mean for hiring for diversity? Are those two things going to be things that need to be balanced somewhat? It's just, I don't have any answers. I just think it's kind of deep and interesting.
Yeah, when I think of in diversity. But nevertheless, a unity, nevertheless, and a diversity. So there's a definite identity, even though it's ever evolving, and ever being shaped in conversation with others, so to speak. There's a saying in Catholic theology, non solum sed etiam, which means not only, but also. And so that's why I keep kind of pushing against this little polemic I have going against any kind of reductionism. That's against the grain of what's meant by doing Catholic or academics in a Catholic setting. So in that sense, there's a unity that subsists and is promoted and fostered, a distinct Catholic identity. For instance, how does this become more concrete? The fact that there is daily liturgy on Walsh University campus. This is distinct from what might be going on at or the different types of liturgy at other institutions or lack of liturgy. The prayer garden, the cross on campus, the crosses in the rooms, all these things, the mystery of Christ permeates the space conspiracy education. So in that sense, it's an emphasis in terms of unity, but it's also openness in terms of diversity, welcoming any and every conversation partner to the table. Yes?
Okay. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
Okay.
I was lucky enough to chair a couple panels at the Vatican II conference. I learned a ton. I'm really curious. I have always used, when I speak about Gaudium, when I have students use Gaudium, I always try to set it in a historical context as well. The thing I realized at this conference was just how my historical context had nothing to do with the conversation going on in the church itself about the writing of Gaudium. In theology classes, did you guys talk about that? The conversation that's taking place at the time as the document is being written, where it comes from within the church? Is that I don't know. I'm just asking the question.
Yeah, certainly. We always emphasize the historical, cultural, social context of every church pronouncement. Every doctrine that's proclaimed is always done so through human language, through a historical context, through certain issues. Most of the councils, ecumenical councils, the 20 councils prior to Vatican II were called in response to particular issues in terms of especially doctrine. Who is Jesus? Of Nazareth? Is he true God, true human, a mixture? What's the deal? And coming up with precise doctrinal formulations to guide the faithful in the sense of unity. But always these things are done in the historical context, including Vatican II in the throes of the 1960s in the wake of World Wars I and II and the Cold War and all these sexual revolution, all these events occurring in the modern world is responding to some dire needs of humanity.
I think a good example of that is even just like a lot of literature, most literature, has to be understood in terms of context and hermeneutics and understanding. For example, the place of women in the New Testament. Well, it was a different culture, a different time, and it has to be understood in that context. You can't simply take the attitude toward women 2,000 years ago predicated of today. And another good example is for years and years and years after the Council of Trent, when I was a little kid and I served Mass, I had learned to do the responses in Latin. I had no idea what I was saying, but my pronunciation was really good. But we had Latin for many years, and what's the reason? Well, the reason is because at the time of the Protestant Reformation, the Protestants embraced the vernacular. That has to be understood. Another good example would be the emphasis that Catholics have had on the Eucharist. We continue to have on the Eucharist, but we have it at the expense of an emphasis on the Scriptures and on the Bible, because that's what the Protestants did. In other words, humans are humans, and these factors always enter into the march and the progress of humankind. So we definitely need to keep that in context. And one of the things that the Vatican II does is that it starts looking at some of the global problems that are starting to twin in the modern world for which nobody's had to offer any decent responses yet, including things like nuclear war and socialism and communism and things like that. And so the context of the world situation is in fact what caused Vatican II to respond, again, contextually and hermeneutically reading the signs of the times.
Yes, Brother Guy.
One of the things in terms of Vatican II is very important is there were movements, and all these topics, there were movements already afloat in the Catholic circles.
Right.
Coming to the head, and so forth. So you need to know that and how they were thinking about things to really understand the documents themselves.
I found it really interesting. So much of it came from Catholic workers' movement. So much of it came from Catholic responses to Nazism, before World War II. That was really fascinating to me, all the various threads where those came from.
Religious freedom, the American experience.
Mhm, absolutely.
Any other questions or comments? What we like to do with part of the time we have left is to have you work with those at the tables